Welcome everyone to Milfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Pitt, Season 1, Episode 1. It's simply called 7 a.m. I didn't realize when I was told I was watching The Pitt that we'd be doing a 24 style events will occur in real time show, which it isn't actually, technically. I mean, each episode, at least from what I can tell, based on this first one, is going to be an hour of the day, and it's going to take place over surprisingly 15 hours. I didn't think there was going to be 15 episodes in this. I assumed there'd be about 10, just because, that tends to be what the length of these types of shows are now on streaming services. But it's 15. This is a Patreon sponsored show, so thank you very much to Allison for picking it. And this is definitely a little outside of my comfort zone, in that I don't really watch medical shows, and I don't think I've ever reviewed like a straight medical show. I did do the first episode of that one about the hurricane, but there was more of like an event happening at the hospital as opposed to it just being kind of your typical cases. Now, that said, though, I don't know what sort of day-long storylines are going to take place over the course of this season. This first episode maybe planted some seeds, but for the most part, this first episode seemed to be just kind of establishing the crazy, like, atmosphere, the constant churning of the gears and the cogs as patients come in, and all of the different fires that are being put out with the main medical staff going around and trying to diagnose people, focusing on the ones who need more immediate care. There's a big waiting room. They're understaffed. The Pitt refers specifically to like this ER or this section of the hospital. Yeah, I assumed it was called The Pitt because it was set in Pittsburgh, which it may still be, although I don't know if they referenced that at any point in this episode. But I mean, if I'm wrong, by all means let me know. So honestly, this first episode, I don't know how much I'm going to have to say in terms of analysis, because most of it was trying to just keep track of all these new characters, because there's a lot of characters. We've got the medical staff, we've got the trainee doctors who are in there as well. We have patients, some of whom are probably one and dones, but some of them might be around or recurring throughout the day because they'd still be there later in the day. And it's tough to tell what we're doing with some of that. And like I say, it's a very different show from what I normally talk about. I will say that the gimmick of it being each episode being an hour of the day, I do like. I do think that gives it something a little extra. There's a little bit of a space there that kind of forces it to kind of stick to something that I do appreciate, gives it a bit more structure than perhaps I would have expected if it was just a typical weekly medical show. But it's tough for me because I don't typically watch these types of shows, and honestly, I try and pay attention to details when I'm watching shows, and there's so many like different patients that are quickly dealt with in this episode that it would be impossible without watching it like 3 times and taking copious notes to actually keep track of what every patient's like situation is, what their condition, their symptoms, whatever it may be. There's a couple of notable ones that I'm definitely going to talk about because they stuck out a bit more, but honestly, keeping track of all of them is quite tough. I guess first thing I'll talk about really is maybe the characters, the cast, who I will shit you not, I did not realize that there was someone in here that I knew, not personally, obviously, but like just an actor that I knew. Fiona Dourif's in this show, and I know who she is. She is the daughter of Brad Dourif, and she's been in a couple of the Chucky movies. She was in the TV show, and I did not recognize her. And it really goes back to the idea that people joke about with Zooey Deschanel, that bangs on a woman are kind of like Clark Kent putting on glasses, where it is a valid disguise, because I watched her, and she's like frequently in this episode. She's not like a small part. She's one of the main recurring characters. And I never once went, oh, she looks familiar, or that's Fiona Dourif. Not once. I can see it now that I know, but I did not clock it the entire time. So I don't know what chameleon stuff's going on there, aside from just bangs are like a disguise. It's her secret identity. So so she's in there as well, is one of the main characters. The lead of the show is a character named Michael Robnovich. And I am looking at a list at IMDb here because I did not catch any names, really, honestly. but he is like the lead. We start the episode with his arrival to the hospital, so we're definitely sort of using him as the anchor of what the story is going to be built around. And it teases a couple things early on about how he took over for the previous doctor who had his particular job. He's not necessarily, I mean, he's kind of the one in charge to an extent on the floor, at least during this shift, because we actually get to meet the guy who had the night shift. He goes up and talks to him on the roof, and there's kind of like a weird scene where he's like kind of at the edge of the roof, and they kind of joke like he might jump, but it would be, it'd be kind of rude for him to jump on his shift, is the joke he makes. And it kind of seems like this is just their dark sense of humor rather than the idea that he's actually worried that he's going to jump. But it's definitely upfront saying how tough this job is and how tough it is dealing with all the, not just the patients and all the stress of actually having to do the job well, but also the bureaucracy side of it. And that's something that he also goes up against in this episode. His boss from upstairs comes down and complains about the satisfaction numbers, and he fires back with a bunch of stuff about how, like, they should be all, like, half the people down here are waiting for beds upstairs in the main part of the hospital, and there's beds, and you're just not hiring the staff to actually, take care of them. So it's getting into some of the politics of the healthcare system and stuff like that. Not that I'm super knowledgeable at America's healthcare system, but it seems like it's sort of starting to touch on some of those subjects and whatnot. But to stay with Robnovich, who's kind of our main character, it basically tells us that it's the 4th year anniversary of the death of another doctor, possibly someone he was trying to save, perhaps. They don't give us enough to know that for sure, but we do know that he blames himself. The other characters say that, and it's kind of like dropped for a lot of the episode, other than just that everyone keeps saying and asking him if he's okay, because they're like, hey, you're here today. He doesn't normally work this anniversary, but he's here today. And he's playing it like he's super cool. But the end of the episode, of course, it seems like we go into a flashback. So while we're kind of doing the real-time 24 thing to an extent, we're not actually doing real-time. We're not actually pretending, like 24 would have those things every ad break where the clock would keep ticking and you know exactly where you are. It's like each episode's an hour, but there's some flexibility as to how much we're actually spending time on each thing in the episode. 2 things might overlap a little bit potentially to make things fit. We can go to a flashback. We can do other things. We're not like rigid to it, but we're still generally speaking fitting each hour of the day into an episode. And I think that's a nice middle ground of like adhering to the chaos and just how hectic the day is for what they're doing, but also having a bit of freedom to, do things the way you would want. You don't have to worry about stopping and going, why, when are they getting piss breaks? Because they must be getting piss breaks at some point. I mean, for one thing, we're dancing around a lot of characters, so there's easily time when they're off screen they could be doing that, but it's not going to, I think, be in the way that it was for 24. But yeah, so the flashback at the end seems to go back to the pandemic. At least that's what I think was happening at the end, when he has a bit of a moment where he looks at how busy the waiting room is, and I don't know if I would say he's having a panic attack, maybe he is, but he seems to go back to a time when they were all wearing face masks, they were all in full scrub gear, and seemingly things were very hectic and busy. And the pandemic was brought up earlier in the episode. They brought up that one of the patient's husbands had died during the pandemic. So they're very much setting this in a post-pandemic world, and they're referencing it, and it's come up. And they're tackling other things, like one patient might be the victim of a hate crime. Another patient's son might be like a potential, like, dangerous, if not a serial killer or a mass shooter or something like that. Like, there's a lot of, like, it's dipping its toes into a lot of things that are going on. Now, how natural all those feel, I don't know. Because I think the one with the teenager, right? The teenage son, where the mum comes in and she's been being sick, and the reveal is that she made herself sick because she wanted to come in and talk to someone about her son, talk to the doctors, the social worker, whoever it is, because she found a list of like girls' names that he wants to eliminate, and she's concerned about that. And of course, our main character, Robnovich, like, takes her seriously, shuts the door, and starts asking some sensible questions, like, is there weapons in the house, so on and so on. The doctors kind of recognizes the situation here, which I do, someone goes to, one of the other doctors goes to him and says, hey, I think there's something fishy about this. There's like a weird vibe coming from these two. There's something else going on. And there was another like patient with a kid, and it kind of felt like, oh, one of the things that might come up here sometimes is maybe like, is there a nefarious source for the person's injuries, perhaps? Like, I was imagining like an abused spouse hiding how they got hurt. There's a woman early on who has like burns on her hand, and it almost sounded like it was going to be a big deal, where it was going to turn out to be she was lying and protecting like either a husband or something else. And we actually never see them again that much. I think we see them watching when something else is happening later, but they don't keep popping up throughout the episode like a lot of the other bigger, and I say bigger, I just mean the more prominently featured patients do. So I like that idea. I like the idea that these are issues that obviously the doctors they aren't trained to deal with any of this. They're doctors and surgeons and whatnot. They're not trained to deal with people's social issues, but naturally, given what they're doing, a lot of that ends up kind of coming into it anyway. I guess the part that feels like it's a bit much here for me early on is just that because we're going straight to, oh, this teenager might be like a problem, like he might be going to do something dangerous or dark, maybe later in the day, given the whole thing's going to be set during one day. I suspect it's not the last we've seen of him, even though he runs away at the end of the episode to school. But I do like there was a little moment though where like they're taking it seriously, and Romnovich comes in to listen to the mother, and he's taking it seriously, and I thought the performances were good in the scene and all that. But part of me was thinking, man, this is a lot of like excess stuff on top of just the patients, like what they're going through. Like, we're playing up so much like how busy and how many patients they have to deal with, and how much of a churn that is just on them physically, mentally, taking care of everyone, that going straight in episode 1 to, oh, she's actually here because she wants help for her son and she was scared the police would react inappropriately. I guess it was a lot for me to think that the response from like the surgeons or the doctors wouldn't just be, well, we kind of have to just contact the police for this because we can't really deal with this. Whereas Romnovich is kind of willing to come in and listen to her and take it on and try and talk to the kid. He tries to get the social worker to talk to him, and he even chases him out after him to say, hey, stay and talk with me a little bit. Like, he kind of takes it on as if it's his duty to try and stop this kid from doing something bad and try and talk him down or whatever it is. And maybe that was just like a little bit, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it felt like the episode felt very grounded for most of what it was doing, and it was doing a good job of being very quick. And I'm sure actual doctors and people who work in hospitals will notice things that are off, right? And notice little inconsistencies or things that they've done for dramatic effect, and that's okay. That's, but it's going for a feel. It's going for a feel that it feels very grounded and authentic. And I think this problem that is presented to them with this woman and son at the end, and particularly the way Romnovich like makes it his mission to try and do something about it and then fails, felt more like a TV or movie character as opposed to a real person. And that's not even like a big deal necessarily. It's just that the episode set me up for kind of more, grounded, down-to-earth problems that was tackling real-world subjects. And while this is still a real-world subject in a lot of ways, it felt a bit more like, okay, we're turning up to more dramatic movie levels of, like, I'm not so sure. I mean, maybe some doctors have faced this type of idea before. I don't know. Maybe this is something that some people have done where they've faked an illness just so they could talk to a doctor because they need to try and find a way of doing it without their son, or I'd imagine usually it's a spouse that they want to try and talk without them around, and this seems innocent perhaps or something. But this is not to say that I don't like it or I don't think it's good. It's just that it caught me a little off guard and felt a little bit more, the word I keep almost going to is fantastical, and that's not quite the right word because it's not fantastical. It's just a notch up from the grounded kind of feel that everything else has throughout the episode, I would say. Right? Everything else feels like it's kind of like staying in a certain way, and I guess that's the point, is that you introduce the bigger, more dramatic thing at the end of the episode as the hook. And to be fair, I think as a hook, it does kind of work, because knowing that this is going to be set over the course of one day of 15 hours presumably the main character's shift, I assume, is going to be 15 hours long, which is a long shift, but doctors, do double shifts and all sorts all the time. It doesn't seem that unbelievable. There is kind of an interesting idea here of like waiting now until somehow we get more of this plot. And it might not happen right away. Like there's almost no reason for it to get more in the next few hours. It might be episode 7 or 8 when school's ended before like we hear about him again, or he comes back to the hospital, or do we hear over the news that something bad's happened somewhere and we maybe tie it to him, or I don't know, but but those feel like really big, grandiose, cinematic ideas as opposed to the more grounded that the rest of the episode feels. So I guess I just wasn't prepared for it to go down that avenue. And it may be something that I actually quite like once it gets more into the show, but at least right now, it was the part that kind of made me reassess, okay, what is this show? Because up until that point, it kind of felt like we're just going to be like dealing with the busy lives of this medical staff, dealing with patients, and maybe some of the patients will have recurring things throughout the day. This episode has a few of those things, and some of them might keep going. There's a young guy named, I think it was Otis, who is having some problems breathing, and he's pretty healthy, he runs triathlons, and the result at the very end of all this is basically that he wasn't hydrating enough, but he straight up kind of dies, like, just after she injects him with something. It's Fiona Dourif's character, Mackay, who's seeing him, and he just, like, passes out, and she doesn't take it seriously for a second or two because she thinks, oh, you've just passed out, and she tries to wake him up, but quickly realizes he's got no pulse, and it becomes this thing where they keep having to shock him, and Romnovich, I guess this is the other thing that felt kind of TV dramatic, for the sake of it, is he kind of just takes a hunch. Well, I say that maybe that's not giving him enough credit. Basically, he has an idea of what's causing him to keep going into, he keeps flatlining, and he's like, hey, I think I know what this is. I think this is to do with the potassium in the kidneys, blah, blah, blah. And he goes on, like, I can't remember all the details. And one of the other main characters I've not really talked about yet, Collins, who's pregnant, and she's not told anyone she's pregnant. Only the desk lady who's in charge of everyone or managing everyone down there knows she's pregnant. That's that. And she seems to have some tension with the main dude, Romnovich. But she's like, hey, you can't just inject him with something until we get the lab work back. And he argues, look, he might not wake back up next time he flatlines if we don't give him this, if we don't do this. And he's like, it's on me, not you, I'll do it. And he makes this call. That felt a little bit movie and TV doctor drama to me, right? This idea that he's willing to take this risk. And I'm not saying that no doctor's ever taken a risk, but it just feels a bit more movie and TV to have him take this chance. And it mostly works. Like, it does immediately start to level him out a little bit. And it turns out to not be that serious in the end, but the guy straight up almost died like 3 times over the course of like 15 minutes. So probably quite a scare for him, but that was a recurring thing throughout the episode. I don't imagine he'll be popping back up later, just because it feels like he's done, right? There's also a running plot with a woman who had her foot completely crushed by the train in the subway, I think, is what they said. And this is actually one of the things that is worth mentioning here as well, is that this is pretty gory. Like, you see this foot that's been completely, like, de-skinned and is hanging off by a thread, and we see them kind of handling it, and it actually makes one of the med students, or the student doctors, pass out, who has her own thing where she turns out to be the daughter of someone who works upstairs, and so there's maybe a little bit of a, not so much a nepotism thing, because it sounds like she's done, like, med days or whatever in other places and stuff, but the idea that there's a lot of pressure on her because both her parents are doctors and she's trying to whatever, but she's a bit younger than all the other students. She's only 20, so she's kind of, she's gotten ahead because she's like super smart and she's worked hard to be here, but she's also fainting. But anyway, so, and the whole big thing with this woman who got her train ran over, or her foot ran over with a train, is that no one knows what language she's speaking. And it's not until later where someone kind of gets a map out and makes her point to Nepal, it ends up being. But no one can figure out what language she's speaking. There's like one of the women there who can speak like 6 languages, one of the doctors, and she's like, no, that's not one of the ones I speak. I don't recognize it. So that's like a running thing, as is the guy who came in with her, who tried to help her in the train tracks, and he hit his head. So he gets stitched up and gets some surgery, and they're not sure if he's ever going to wake up. That's a patient. Another one of the patients to spend a lot of time on is a child who won't wake up. He seems to be fine otherwise, but he just won't wake up, and the parents are very worried. And, you know, there's the typical, what could it be this? Could it be this? Like, we're ruling things out. And then eventually the doctor character, Langdon, who's kind of the asshole of the group, who doesn't seem to care about things as much, he finds like sort of like gummy kind of parts in the kid's mouth, and the dad realizes that the wife's brother had brought over some cannabis gummies, and the kid clearly has eaten a bunch of them, and that's what's actually caused this. So they figured it out. The mum and dad start having a fight in the hospital. This is the sort of thing that felt a lot more like grounded to me, is the idea of this fight breaking out with this couple once they realize what's happened to the kid, because it felt a lot more natural in the context of, yeah, once the wife finds this out, that her brother and husband have left this sort of stuff lying around in his pockets, and it's led to the kid almost dying. She starts getting really mad, and like, yeah, they have to deal with the fact that they're now having a fight, and they have to pull the husband out and, like, you know, talk to them separately to try and like keep everything calm. The idea of managing not just the patients, but also the patients' loved ones who might be either emotional or heated or whatever. Like, this is, you know, like, if I think of like the idea of like the crisis zone of the emergency floor of the hospital, and this idea that they're having to manage all the people simultaneously, figure things out. Because one of the things they say early on is, like, you know, keep your eye on the waiting room and just make sure that no one out there is like on the brink of death, because those are the ones you obviously bring in first. Anyone who's not immediately going to die, you can wait up to maybe 12 hours before there's room or time to see them. So, you know, it really emphasizes that throughout the episode, and there's a lot of chaos going on. Is that all the major cases? There's the one guy that runs about naked and then is like shitting in a bedpan later. I guess the other more important things would be the various characters. You know, I've talked about the main guy and Collins, who's pregnant, and you know, there's tension between them. They don't go into it too much. I suspect there's a romantic history, but I mean, I'm just kind of, you know, shooting that based on not much. Like I say, Langdon is a little bit younger than the others, and he is a little bit more, you know, he's a little bit less, I don't know, his bedside manner isn't as hot, I suppose we'll say. So you've got that. The med students, there's 4 of them. There's a really eager blonde girl who's Melissa King. I'm just checking their names. And she's super eager and happy to be there. And everyone, like all the older people, are like, oh yeah, wait until the end of the day, see if you still feel that way. There's Trinity Santos, who I recognized her face, and I'm like, what do I know her from? She was in Picard. So immediately, I instantly disliked her a little bit. Not that she's a bad character, this is just an echo from another show that I didn't like. But she's perfectly fine in this. She's perfectly fine. And she's kind of coming up with nicknames for the others based on what happens to them. Like, for example, Javadi, who's the one that faints and is the daughter of one of the doctors upstairs, Santos calls her Crash because she crashed and fainted during a scene. So you get that Javadi wants to prove herself, and she doesn't like the fact that she's kind of been given easier tasks because she fainted. She wants to keep proving herself. And it's like, no, it doesn't. I mean, it's not about giving you an easy task. It's about the fact that you fainted, and we have to give you things that you can handle for the rest of the day. So she's feeling a lot of pressure. And then the one med student who's a guy is Whitaker, Dennis Whitaker. He is apparently from a farm. That comes up when he's interacting with Santos for a little bit. He hurts his pinky when they're moving an old person onto a bed at one point. And he's a little klutzy. He does have one scene where he diagnoses someone with a Gladstone and says it's not like a huge deal, you just have to have a low-fat diet, which the guy doesn't seem to be particularly thrilled about. So it's kind of teaching you a couple of things about his character, actually, and it's how inexperienced he is in both cases. One is that, well, he's pleasant enough, like he's not like a dick or anything to the patient. He doesn't really break the news about how you have to change your lifestyle all that well. He just, because the guy's like, oh wait, am I going to be okay? Do I need surgery? And he's like, nah, you can manage this with a low-fat diet. And the one thing we know about this guy is that he had steak last night. So this may actually be kind of a big deal to him that he's been told that he can't have fatty foods. And he, like, I think it does feel like he's inexperienced with the way that he just kind of like brushes past that and doesn't really stop to consider that this needs to be emphasized. He has to make it clear to him that, hey, fatty foods will do some harm to you now. It's a serious thing. Like, he doesn't really break it down. He just kind of like says it as if he expects the guy to understand. And well, that's that then. My job here is done. And then secondly, as he's walking away, the other doctor or whoever in the room comes up and says, hey, did you do this type of scan? Even though you think you found everything, like that this could also be a sign that there's a heart attack potential incoming or something like that. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So the two things here is that he doesn't really talk to the patient. He's nice enough, but he doesn't do it in a way where he conveys the information, I think, in a responsible way. And then also, he's so excited that he found the cause very quickly that he's willing to just sort of like, congratulate himself on a job well done, and misses something that potentially could be a deal that could have been prevented or caught. It might have been a big deal. No, he might not have a heart attack. He might not be on the path to that, but it could be a sign of that, and that was something that was emphasized in the scene. So, yeah, I think that's most of what happened. There was a lot going on. There's a lot of darting around. There's a lot of like talking to one patient and then going back over to the other patient who's got something going on, and then it darts over back to another patient. I guess the nicest thing I can say about it at this point is that it does feel hectic in a really orchestrated way where there's a lot of darting around. I can't imagine that writing the script for this is an easy task because there's so much to juggle and so many people to bounce around, and there's layers of like character types. You've got the doctors, you've got the doctor students, you've got the patients, you've got the patient's loved ones, and they're all in a mix, interacting and doing different things. If I have a critique, really, other than just maybe realigning what I was expecting from the show, where it gets a bit more kind of tropey in its doctor qualities, is maybe just the idea that there's a little hook at the end, but there's not really that much of an overarching plot in the first episode, and maybe there never will be necessarily. Maybe it'll just be kind of about some of these things will keep recurring. There's always going to be new stuff. I guess the one thing I didn't say is that there's like a time every day where they usually get a couple of old people, because it's when the old folks' homes and the care homes do their morning checks on all the patients. So they always get a couple of people in who are in the process of dying. So they do, like, this old person dies and they call it, and this is where Langdon kind of comes across as an asshole, because he's like, we didn't even have to waste their time. They could have called this at the old person's home. This was a waste of our time. Who's working over there? And he's very dismissive. He's very much blaming someone else for not doing their job properly. And it's Romnovich who jumps in, and maybe one of the most likable things he does all episode is he jumps in and says, no, or it's one nurse who's taking care of 50 people, and she had to call 911 to take care of this person so she could keep taking care of the other 49. Like, she's overworked. I mean, he doesn't know that for sure, but that's the assumption he's making, is that Langdon is assuming that someone's incompetent, and he's like, hey, no, it's probably someone who's underhelped and underfunded, just like we are. Right? This is someone who just couldn't give the resources to helping this person and has other people who need to be taken care of. I liked him pointing that out. It felt like he was, bringing this asshole down a peg or two. That was a good character bit. Made him likable. And not that he's unlikable anywhere else necessarily, but it was like, okay, you need a couple of moments like that to make these characters kind of feel like they're likable, and they mostly are to varying degrees. There's one or two that don't really have anything in this episode. For example, Samira Mohan is one of the doctor characters, and she's there in the scenes, like, she's helping, and she's like, she's in the operation scenes. We hear her like have some dialogue with people when she's doing medical jargon, but there's no character stuff with her in this episode. You don't really get to know anything about her here. So, and maybe some of these side characters will get fleshed out. There's also like a young guy who's helping, going around, whose name's Matteo Diaz. Not that I knew that from the show. I'm just reading it from the cast list here. Like, he's not really a character yet. He's just kind of there helping. And maybe these side characters, these like sort of C-tier characters, will just stay there because they always have to have extra people around to feel like a real hospital. But maybe they'll flesh them out. I don't know. But regardless, like, it does a good enough job, like, setting up enough of the characters. If anything, I would say that it sets up the med students a little bit more than the adults. Maybe it's just because it's easier to, like, present them as new because they are new to the hospital. So they naturally have some, like, getting to know you chit chat with each other and things like that. But, you know, there's a solid foundation as far as that stuff goes. Yeah, I thought it was a solidly made TV episode. I don't know how passionate I feel about it yet. I feel like I can't answer that until I see more of it. I feel like I can't answer if, like, I'm actually that engrossed or like the format all that much until I see more. Because, like I say, typically medical shows aren't really my thing. I don't really care about just constantly doing the problem solving of figuring out what each person has. It's just never been a... In the same way that most generic cop shows don't really do anything for me either. Obviously, there's lots of stuff I watch that has detectives in it, but it's not your procedural stuff. And that's probably why the format of this, of the, you know, hour per day or hour per episode for the whole day is more appealing to me, because at least there's like, okay, there's a kind of a gimmicky, like, hook here. And I mean that in a good way. I don't mean gimmick in a bad way. I just mean gimmick in that there's a chosen, like, lens or focus that they're using to present, like, the atmosphere that they want and tell the type of story that they want. But it's really hard, based on this first episode, to really say what a lot of that overall story is going to be. Like, I've made a little prediction here or there for some of the ongoing things that might happen, mainly that teenager who might be violent. But for the rest of it, like, this ending where I think it goes into a flashback, are we going to see more of that flashback? Is it just going to be something we get peppered throughout episodes? You know, am I misreading that and it's cutting ahead? I don't think so. I think it is a flashback. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it, you know, if it grows on me, and, like, how much of it works going forward. But I don't think it's bad, but by any means. It's just, I mean, honestly, I'm glad that I'm hitting 30 plus minutes here for talking about it. And I guess it's because there's enough characters and medical things to talk about that are going on. Because I was a little bit worried when I got to the end and I felt like, wait, how much do I have to say here, really? I guess there's a lot to say in terms of, like, you know, different events happening and different characters, but there's not really... And to be fair, pilots and first episodes tend to be more like this because you're not really into the swing of the story yet. But I really felt like there wasn't as much story or, like, progression to analyze yet. Which may be fine. Like, maybe once we hit episode 2, episode 3, whatever, that might all come flowing very naturally. But right now, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I have no idea how to talk about this. I've never talked about a show that's quite like this. So hopefully, me trying to stumble my way through how I felt gives some indication, and my summary of, like, what's in the episode gives some indication. Not that I think anyone's, like, checking this out to see if they should watch the show or not. I think it's already quite popular amongst people. People who like this type of show are super into it. It's getting a season 2. But, hey ho, so it's always interesting to try something a little outside your comfort zone. But that is my thoughts on the first episode of The Pitt. So let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments. No spoilers for the rest of it, of course, but if you want to if you've seen the whole thing and you want to say, oh, you know, you think you'll think I'll like the rest of it for whatever reason, or, you know, like, you know, is it a satisfying overall story that's played throughout the 15 episodes, that kind of thing, by all means do comment below. But you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. You can also, of course, be a YouTube member or do a one-time super thanks. Any support is greatly appreciated. Check out MailFuzz Movies, the movie channel where all the movie podcasts live. But that is me. Thank you once again for watching or listening. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?